What are the big topics in English composition? Good day to you. This lesson reviews 5 big questions or critical criteria that all college writers should know. Come and learn these 5 important topics, prepare for the composition exam, and learn about writing-intensive courses. Writers should be able to answer accurately the following 5 questions if they are to succeed as writers in the academy and in ministry, or any time one writes to create, compose, and communicate a message. 1. What are the stages of the writing process? 2. What are the generic features of the essay? 3. What makes a claim informed and persuasive? 4. What are frames for integrating sources? And 5. What do experienced writers do when they revise? On a practical note, I suggest that you compose your answers to these questions before starting the exam. Then, after you have written and saved your answers, you can paste your paragraphs one at a time into the online exam's text blocks. This process will help you think better and avoid problems of composing online, for instance, if the app somehow doesn't save your answers. The exam asks for well-formed and informed short answer paragraphs, 1 paragraph per question. So please style paragraphs according to thesis, analysis, synthesis, 3 good Greek terms. A. Thesis answers the question clearly and directly. B. Analysis reports results of analysis in the form of definitions, distinctions, processes, elements, and relevant examples. C. Synthesis summarizes or wraps up the topical paragraph. In addition to answering the questions, please illustrate your answers as appropriate in a brief example drawn from your experience as a writer who has worked through the crafts and drafts of the writing process. Do your best as always. On this skill and the big topics that follow, please refer to our 2 excellent handbooks, Diana Hacker in Rules for Writers, and Kate Turabian and the Craft of Research team in A Manual for Writers. These handbooks are abbreviated as RW and MW, respectively, in the heading of slides followed by the relevant chapter number. First, good writers know their process. Writing is a verb, a process, and the better you know the writing process, the better you can anticipate it, plan it, and use it to develop your written product. Writers who understand the writing process work more efficiently and effectively. The first big question is, what are the 5 stages of the writing process? To answer well, you should be able to A. Name the 5 stages of the recursive writing process, and B. Describe how one works or should work through the 5 stages of the writing process. First, invention is 50% of one's time, effort, and energies. Invention includes discovering and defining the research question, considering and proposing a thesis statement, and creating or discovering reasons and evidence to support one's thesis. Invention involves identifying one's target readers and seeking to address their questions, concerns, and reservations in the rhetorical situation. Second, drafting is 10% of energy and involves of outlining and sketching one's ideas, getting it down on paper or in the document. Then one seeks to develop the draft as much as possible with reasons and evidence. Third, critique is an important 5% of one's energy, in which one seeks out informed feedback and critical dialogue so that one can create a revision plan toward improving the essay. Fourth, revision is a large 25% of the writing process, in which a writer re-sees the essay and reimagines its potential. Revision is not editing. When revising, a writer thinks globally about the quality of the argument, its arrangement, and its effectiveness or helpfulness in convincing target readers of the truth or benefit of one's thesis. Global revision concerns improving the argument. Local revision concerns styling paragraphs and sentences effectively. Fifth, editing accounts for the final 10% of time and effort, depending on one's skill level. When editing, one pays attention to sentence level clarity, correctness, and concision, reducing wordiness, as well as rechecking citation of sources of information and rechecking document design and titles for correctness and effectiveness. Good writers know their genre, for writers never just write, but write in genres, understanding the features and expectations of a genre. The second big question is, What is the difference between an analysis essay and a research essay? To answer well, you should be able to A. Name the generic features of the analysis or opinion essay and the additional features of the research essay, and B. Explain the differences between the two essay types. The analysis essay is a question-answer genre that reports one's analysis of primary sources. But the research essay is a problem-solution genre that not only analyzes primary sources, but has 4 further features as follows. First, significance. The research essay addresses not just a local textual question, but a significant debated issue on which the experts disagree. By addressing an issue relevant to the topic or text, writers create more significance and motivation for readers. Second, scope of sources. The research essay has a wider scope of sources in that it not only analyzes primary text, but enters and engages the scholarly conversation reported in the secondary sources, focused on a relevant issue or research problem. Third, survey of prior research. A research essay starts with what's called a literature review that summarizes and categorizes the prior research on the debated issue, that is, the spectrum of scholarly or critical opinion. Located in the research essay's introduction, the literature review maps out the terrain of the scholarly conversation in order to situate perspectives, including one's own, on the issue. Fourth, structure. The analysis essay has 3 sections: introduction, core argument, and conclusion, abbreviated as ICC, while the research essay has 1 additional section that starts with the letter C. You know what it is? It's the counter-argument section, in which one writes a critique of other viewpoints on the issue and addresses probable questions or objections raised by an academic audience. These 4 differences, significance, scope, survey of prior research, and structure, mark the big distinctions between an opinion essay and the research essay. As we've seen, an analysis essay is a question-answer genre, but a research essay is a problem-solution genre involving a debated issue on which the experts disagree. Now, in real estate, the top 3 rules are location, location, location. So in writing, the top rules are problems, 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 as explained by the Turabian team, authors of A Manual for Writers and the Craft of Research, who write the following guidance. If one issue makes or breaks a student research paper, it is the quality of the problem that the writer poses. Students with good questions find more useful sources, read more thoughtfully, and make better decisions in planning and drafting their papers. Students with not even a question to answer, much less a good problem to solve, are more likely to wander, to pursue dead ends, to write for themselves rather than their readers, and therefore to need more of your guidance along the way and more extensive feedback at the end. So this is good guidance regarding the value of questions and problems. Third, writers need to know about argumentation because an essay makes an argument. The third big question is this: what is the difference between offering a mere opinion or claim, writing an informed opinion or claim, and composing a convincing opinion or claim? By opinion or claim, I mean both the main claim, called the thesis, and subordinate claims, often called reasons. To answer the question well, you should be able to explain A, what distinguishes the 3 adjectives modifying opinion and claim, and B, how writers create strong arguments that convince readers. First, who cares about mere opinions? Well, your sympathetic friends might care about your unsupported claims offered with little or no evidence, but hardly anyone else. Second, who cares about informed opinions? Well, many non-critical readers care about whimsically supported opinions proffered with some evidence, but if the reader has not considered audience or the quality of sources, then the supported opinion will probably only convince those who already believe it. Third, who cares about informed, convincing opinions? Well, critical readers and truth seekers. Do you see the difference between the 3 modifiers? Those writing informed claims don't think much about audience or the quality of sources. But those composing informed, convincing claims think carefully about audience, seeking to meet their needs by addressing their questions, concerns, and reservations, and then selecting reasons and evidence meaningful to the audience. Jesus, the master communicator, for example, always anticipates his audience's needs, and this is what makes his communication so probing and interesting. In sum, argumentation is communication, not just finding any evidence to support a claim, but doing so to serve an audience. Fourth, good writers know how to integrate their sources of information by attaching quotations to their own sentences and then framing the quotations. The fourth big question is, how do writers integrate sources by framing them? To answer sufficiently, you should be able to A. Name and describe the four corners of a frame, B. Illustrate with an example, and C. Explain how a frame creates coherence. Good writers integrate sources by meaningful frames, and likewise, writers frame paragraphs and whole essays for significance. Writers integrate each reference, a quotation, paraphrase, or summary of sources into the sentence, paragraph, and argument with four corners. First corner, introduce the quotation for target readers, usually naming the author. Second corner, integrate the quotation into one sentence with a signal phrase, plus a comma after a phrase, a colon after an independent clause, or by weaving the quotation into the grammar and verbal tense of one sentence. The third corner, I cite the quotation at the end of the clause, not directly after the quotation, using the correct style of citation. And fourth corner, interpret the quotation accurately to support one's point or claim. So please describe these four key moves and give an example illustrating how you perform these key moves. Thus, you will avoid being a hit-and-run quoter and confusing your readers when you integrate sources by framing them. Sources refers to quotations, paraphrases, and summaries of sources of information. Please illustrate for the exam and then discuss it. Here is an example. In his epistles, the Apostle Paul often explains how Christians have been crucified with Christ, meaning one's old man, with its guilt due to sins, has died in Christ's death, so that one's authentic new man, as given by the risen Christ, is free to walk in newness of life. And then the citation. Well, where are the four corners framing the quotation? Well, the first corner, one introduces a quotation with a signal phrase, including the author's name, the Apostle Paul in this case, relevant context, and a colorful verb like explains. Second, the second corner, one integrates the quotation using a signal phrase including a present tense verb like explains, although one can use a past tense verb like explained to emphasize the historical past tense if one wants to. Then one uses appropriate punctuation and quotation marks to signify direct quotation. In this case, I weave the quotation crucified with Christ into the grammar of my sentence. Good writers avoid says or said, but select colorful verbs like claims, explains, describes, and suggests to represent the tone of the text. Third, or the third corner, one cites the source using the appropriate style of citation, such as parenthetical citation for the Bible, for Romans, for which I record the standard abbreviation for the book and version with chapter and verse. I place the citation at the end of the clause, which is also the end of the sentence, and I place a period on the right side or outside of the parenthetical citation. The fourth corner, one interprets the quotation to explain the relevant point. In this case, most of my sentence is explanation, and I use a phrase of Paul's to help me interpret his key phrase, crucified with Christ, which is a summary of the gospel. Well, writers conclude analysis paragraphs with their own words to assert their voice and to manage others' voices in the argument. Framing important information applies not only to quotations, but to paragraphs, sections of essays, and whole essays for the sake of coherence. Fifth, good writers plan to revise as part and parcel of the writing process. The fifth big question in composition is, what is revision and what do seasoned writers do when they revise? To answer well, you should be able to A. Define revision correctly, not confusing it with editing, and then B. Describe the revision process. What is revision? Revision literally means re-seeing or viewing again, and accounts for 25% of the writing process, involving three aspects. First, revision is reimagining your essay's potential and possibilities, to open your eyes and do a double take, as it were, at the compositional or argument level of what your essay could do and could become to meet or exceed your goals for your rhetorical situation. Second, revision is evaluating your essay's qualities, especially the essay's generic and strategic features according to critical criteria. By evaluating quality, you reassess the essay's argument and generic features, such as what's present and what's missing from the essay, and review the quality of the thesis, the argument, the evidence, the arrangement, the needs and questions of target readers, and how the whole argument ought to support the thesis. Of course, it's wise and helpful to ask a writing center consultant to help you evaluate your essay for revision, because a writing consultant offers fresh eyes and knows the critical criteria that should always inform and guide revision. Third, revision is applying your revision plan to meet your goals, a plan based on your reassessment of your essay, a plan with several tasks and steps to improve your essay. For instance, the plan might include, as a first point of business, ways to develop more relevant evidence. Second, to refine the thesis. And third, to develop the conclusion with logical implications and practical applications. Some writers, like me, divide revision into two processes: global revision for improving the argument and local revision for improving paragraphs and style. I take this approach, but I distinguish it from editing. Seasoned writers know that revision is a normal part of the writing process, so they plan to revise. But inexperienced, naive writers, namely all recent high school graduates, think they are bad writers if they are told they have to revise. Then they tend to feel frustrated and their confidence falls. But this is due to a misunderstanding. They think writing is a product rather than a creative process that can improve. Good writers plan to revise. If you're afraid to revise, you'll be afraid to write and won't like writing, and will probably over-procrastinate. So don't be afraid of revising. Experienced writers plan to revise because they know that revision is part and parcel of the writing process. Remember, everyone and everything can be improved through informed revision. In revision, writers ask, "What's my argument?" In global revision, writers seek to find and develop their argument with a view to writing for target readers. So writers ask rhetorical argument-level questions of their drafts, such as these. What important question am I addressing? That is, what's the research question or the issue? Second, what kind of question is it? If you recall, stasis theory posits 4 kinds of arguments based on 4 kinds of questions. Questions of causation, definition, criticism, and solution. Third, what's my message, main claim, or thesis? Fourth, how have others answered this question? And this involves reading the scholarly conversation on the issue recorded in secondary sources. Fifth, how can I compose a convincing case with good reasons and grounding evidence that's meaningful for my target readers? And sixth, have I addressed my target readers' questions, concerns, and reservations? An important part of global revision is discovering, clarifying, and improving one's thesis statement. As a reminder, a thesis answers a question. A thesis is often one or more of the following: the answer to a question you have posed, the resolution of a problem you have identified, a statement that takes a position on a debatable topic, as excellently stated by Hacker and Summers in Rules for Writers, Chapter 1. Part of global revision is evaluating the quality of one's thesis statement according to at least 4 criteria. What are the criteria of effective research questions and thesis statements? Well, they have these 4 marks or characteristics. They're concrete, not too general in its terms, but as concrete or specific as possible. It's narrow, not too broad for the topic, but qualified and manageable in scope. It's challenging, not too bland or obvious, but connected to a problem or offering insights. And is grounded, not too speculative, but capable of being supported with relevant evidence. Strive for these 4 criteria in your main claims or thesis statements. Learning a craft like composition is mostly about learning the critical criteria, like these 4 terms, and learning how to apply them. The most interesting thesis statements come in 2 kinds. One kind is concrete and offers rich insights that give readers a new understanding or perspective on an important topic or text. The second kind is a challenging one by proposing a position on a debated issue, or beyond positions, seeking to correct or modify the conversation. In sum, writers ought to know these 5 big topics in composition: the 5 stages of the writing process, features of analysis and research essays, how to make a claim informed and persuasive, how to integrate quotations by framing them, and why and how to revise to improve the product. The composition exam asks you about these 5 topics. Now let's transition to writing-intensive courses. Most colleges and universities have writing-intensive courses across the curriculum. Our college has designated 3 writing-intensive courses across the curriculum as part of its quality enhancement plan titled Arguing the Case, Critical Thinking Through Writing. The QEP established a WI-WC partnership for WI courses. That is, a partnership between the writing-intensive course and the Writing Center for these 3 courses: Hermeneutics, Theology 1, and History of Ideas. But what is critical thinking? Critical thinking is or involves asking the right questions. Questions about topics and text, questions about the rhetorical situation, which includes the historical, social, and intellectual context, questions about the critical context written by literary critics or commentators recorded in secondary sources, questions about arguments, reasons, evidence, assumptions, language itself, and implications. At the root of modern civilization, Socrates offers a model of critical thinking by always asking the pertinent question to discover overlooked ignorance, assumptions, and opportunities to learn. This is his commendable wisdom. Writing-intensive courses have 3 requirements. A research essay with a thesis answering a significant question. B, lengthy writing process including meeting with a Writing Center consultant at least 1 week before the essay is due. And C, evaluation of essays according to the case rubric for critical thinking through writing. The college's case rubric for critical thinking has 5 criteria appropriate to the research writing process and genre. The case rubric is used throughout writing-intensive courses to teach and evaluate research writing and emphasize critical thinking. We can pose the 5 criteria as questions to evaluate an essay. Does the writer perform these 5 key moves? Clarify the issue, that is, the debated issue on which the experts disagree, often called the research problem. Assert a thesis as an answer, solution, or position. Situate perspectives by summarizing the scholarly opinions on the issue. Argue with good reasons and grounding evidence. Explain practical applications and/or logical implications. You will learn much more about these 5 key moves in Composition 2 and in writing-intensive courses. Let's glance at the essays in writing-intensive courses. First, what's the question in biblical studies? Well, research questions in hermeneutics take this general form. What's the best interpretation of the passage? For example, what do Christ's self-defining metaphors reveal about his person and work? Or, again, what does Paul teach in 1 Timothy regarding sanctification or the process of character change? For a thesis, then, one asserts an interpretation, or the main idea of the text, or MIT as they call it in biblical studies, to answer the research question. Second, what's the question in theological studies? Well, research questions in Theology 1, for instance, have this general form. What is the best position on the debated issue about theology? For example, how does God reveal himself to humanity? That's a very interesting research question. And for a thesis, one proposes a position statement, that's the key phrase, to answer the research question. Third, what's the question in History of Ideas? Well, research questions in History of Ideas 4, for instance, have this general form. how do different thinkers in the Western tradition approach similar ideas or questions? For example, how does Anselm's ontological argument for God's existence differ from William Paley's teleological argument for God's existence? Or for a thesis, one asserts a thesis statement to answer the research question and place it at the end of the introductory paragraph where readers expect to find it. By the way, the major difference between Anselm's and Paley's arguments is the intervention of the scientific revolution called the European Enlightenment in the late 17th century, so that Anselm, writing before the Enlightenment, offers a deductive philosophical argument for his thesis, while William Paley, writing after the Enlightenment, researches an inductive scientific argument for his thesis. Why know the question? To reply, I'll ask another question. What does existential writer Albert Camus mean when he defines myth as a world of all answers and no questions? In other words, what does it indicate when a student cannot articulate the question that his or her thesis supposedly answers? Well, here's 5 answers for why it has always been important to know the research question. First, to gain perspective on the topic with a broader context. It's short-sighted when students argue for answers to questions they do not recognize or cannot articulate. This is precisely the difference between education and indoctrination, or light versus darkness, as Albert Camus emphasizes. Second, to plan out the research writing process. One has to have a research question to do focused research. Once one has the question and a hypothesis, one can read primary sources strategically, search for secondary sources effectively, and evaluate all information more critically. As a result, the temptation of plagiarism is minimized. Third, to start critical thinking. For thinking critically largely consists in asking the right questions, as Socrates illustrates, along with the Jewish rabbis and even Jesus himself. Fourth, to understand and fulfill the essay genre as an amiable argument toward answering a question. For a writer composes an essay to discover and develop a thesis in answer to a given or created research question. Fifth, to communicate significance and good news, that is, if an audience is to recognize and welcome one's answer as good news. When one communicates a solution without a problem, the result is confusion. An audience has to recognize the problem, such as the problem of sin in the human condition, before it will recognize the good news as indeed good news. A solution is significant only when a writer explains the problem to the audience. To do this, writers often frame their messages according to the problem-solution genre. As a concluding note, I encourage you to enroll in Composition 2 as soon as possible. It's subtitled Research Writing Through Literature and involves 4 fun and important skills: literary analysis of major genres with rich Christian literature, along with modern and classical literature; research writing processes, examining literary works in their context; writing style toward composing clear, concise, correct, cohesive, and coherent sentences and paragraphs; critical thinking and communication, such as comparing literature with the Bible as the great code of art according to Blake; and finally, I wish you a Merry Christmas soon enough, and want to say it's been my pleasure to work with you in your writing. I hope to see you next semester.